creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
Could have a whole hour conversation about this.
I think it sets us up another kind of foundation for our region performing well.
It's pretty forward-thinking, developments for an old busted-up sawmill town, right? So I'm here with Roger Lee. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
I think this will be a fun discussion, and I think you're the, appropriate person for the discussion that I want to have today about, wherein lies the magic that made Central Oregon such a, dynamic and entrepreneurial ecosystem. I was actually interviewing Jim Schell, who's, he's obviously a community leader here in town. And he said, you're a modest guy and you're gonna shirk at this title, but he titled you the architect of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Bend or Central Oregon.
Yeah, Jim and I have a little bit of a beef about that with each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I also have a saying that any successful economic development is a team effort. So
sure. Well, true to form, you shirked the title, but so you're the CEO of the Economic Development Council for Central Oregon, which has been responsible for economic strategy for the area, recruitment of businesses, and expansion of the commercial air services, correct?
Yeah, which is, again, also a team effort with other organizations. Yeah.
Sure. So obviously, Roger's at the forefront of what we're seeing here. So, you're right in the center of that entrepreneurial world and all that collaboration that has made Bend so great. So, Bend in Central Oregon. So before we get too deep into it, I'd love to hear kind of what's your origin story for finding Central Oregon? When did you know that this was going to be home? Did you grow up here? How did you come here?
Yeah, I think most people we talk to, they came here, had it on a list. That list included, some peers that you probably see in your work as well. And we wound up winning on that list. And they said, okay, we're going to make a life here. And we're going to move here without jobs. I was one of those people that moved for a job. So
okay.
I actually
one of the few,
relocated from Northeast Oregon. I'm originally from Idaho.
Okay.
So I moved from Baker City to here to take on this job 20 years ago with EDCO.
Okay. Yeah. So, most of the people that I find, they came here to make their own way. They didn't have a job to come for. That's interesting. Well, that's changing. There's a lot more people that are attracted to that, that vibrant, especially tech and, biotech world that we have going on right now. But, 20 years ago, most people weren't coming here for a job.
Yeah. And I had some affinity for the area. Living in Oregon and Baker City, I got to be friends with the people who were doing economic development over here. I actually did a little bit of business recruiting in the Bend area in Central Oregon when I was in Baker City, it being that much more of a larger city at that time even. And so it wasn't, completely foreign to me, but I actually visited here for the first time in the early 90s.
Okay.
And my brother had gathered the family at Sun River, actually, for a little holiday get-together, family reunion. And it was pretty interesting driving in. It's like nothing.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, there's mountains. There's trees.
Yep.
And then there's a huge amount of traffic. This was prior to the Parkway being built.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, where did all these people come from?
Yeah.
And had a great time in Sun River, but I'd never thought I would actually live in this area.
Okay, so kind of unexpected. So you live in Tumalo, right?
I do.
Yeah, you have a ranch out there. What's your family? Do you have kids?
Yeah, I got a couple.
Share a little bit with your background.
I actually met my wife here.
Okay.
We like to joke with our kids until we took them to the actual for an anniversary recently and took them to the tavern. But we tell people we met in a tavern.
Okay.
It happened to be Pine Tavern, which is a well-established, fine eatery here in town. Yeah. And we met for lunch, and so I actually found more than a job when I came to Central Oregon, and we've got two kids, 12 and 14, Nathan and Catherine. One's a middle schooler, one's a freshman in high school. So, yeah, we're doing the family thing. And when I met my wife, she said, I asked her why she had moved here, because she had moved here recently as well. I'd been here about a year, and she said, it's a great place to raise kids. And I was like, oh, well, how many kids do you have? And she said, well, I don't have any kids. So you're a planner. So she wanted to raise a family in Central Oregon. That's exactly what we're doing. So
Well, that's great. Yeah, I've got my 3 kids. We moved here with 2 of the 3 and had our 3rd kid here, and we were attracted for the same reason. It's such an amazing place to raise kids. But what was so interesting about Central Oregon for me is that not only was it this beautiful place with natural resources from rivers running through downtown to snow-capped peaks in the back, but it was also the progressive business climate here that I had never seen in an environment this small. It's that lightning in a bottle. So here we are in Central Oregon. We've got 150,000 people out here in the middle of nowhere. We're hours from anything, but yeah, it was incredibly progressive, and there was this long-term planning and all these movements like EDCO, working to bring in businesses from all over the West, and that was absolutely shocking for me. And it took a while to sink in, how unique it was.
Yeah.
And so that's what I kind of wanted to discuss today. So, Bend, Central Oregon has always been regularly recognized as one of the most diverse economies for growth. The Milken Institute continually ranks us at, the very top for job growth in the nation, and this is comparing us to similar metro cities across the nation, from Bozeman to Boulder to Austin, all through, but yet we continually rank at that top for job growth. So obviously, that's a little bit newer, and I think it was probably a little less job growth or diversity in the job growth 10, 20 years ago. But help me understand kind of how that happened. Something like that doesn't magically happen in the middle of Central Oregon.
Yeah, we're getting asked about this in various parts of the country and world.
Yeah.
I'm actually speaking next week down in California,
Okay.
what's happened here. But more and more folks are saying, well, how did you do this? And I call it the 40-year overnight success.
Okay.
And the fact that really the groundwork was laid here a long time ago. And it really started off when we lost our primary reason for being as an economy. Our mills closed.
Sure.
We had a huge impact that was really out of the control of people locally to change it. And you've seen this across the West, where these resource-based communities either have or have not made a transition to something else.
Yep.
And in that period of time, folks that were in leadership positions here, both on the public and private side, said, hey, they're creating this new land use system in Oregon. It's going to be really unique in the nation. And one of those has a provision for creating destination resorts in the rural area.
Okay.
It's an opportunity to create a real high amenity, high quality visitor experience that most rural communities can't offer.
And this was part of the land use laws that were put in the early 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and so Deschutes County was one of the few counties to raise their hand and say, we want that.
Yep.
I mean, we want an opportunity to expose people from the outside to this area, and with the hope that we can build this tourism industry, but with the hope that that tourism industry can build something else.
Okay.
So it wasn't
so
just
a ladder.
Yeah, it wasn't just a we're going to replace timber jobs with tourism and
Okay.
everything's going to be grand. It's more, let's expose people. We need a robust tourism industry to do that. Let's set up some mechanisms to make sure that's successful.
Yep.
And that is a means to the end. And I think that continues really today. It's not that we are trying to be a Tahoe or a Jackson Hole or Aspen Vale. We're trying to be a real community with both middle wage jobs, families, et cetera, which is very difficult in those other places where there's kind of a have and have not kind of a situation going on.
Yeah, without question.
Especially the real high end kind of destination resorts there. And it's just been fascinating to see how many people walk in our office. So we generate a lot of our own leads, but how many people that actually contact us and say, hey, I've been visiting this area for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yep.
And I've been trying to figure out a way to get back here.
Yep.
And I'm interested in moving my business. I'm interested in starting an enterprise. Help me out. How do I do that?
Yeah, so this is a perfect time to talk about what is the Economic Development Council for Central Oregon? Is it public? Is it private? And what's your role in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so we're fairly unique in the state. We're among a smaller group of economic development organizations. Most are public.
Okay.
So it's not unusual to hear people say, oh, well, what part of government are you?
Yeah.
But we're not. We're a private corporation managed by professional staff and led by a mostly private sector board of directors.
Okay.
I have one of the larger boards in the Central Oregon area. I think I have 46 or 47 board members currently.
Okay.
But they represent primarily business leaders. There are public leaders there as well. And then we do contracts with public entities, our cities, counties, to essentially offer economic development services locally. And so also relatively unique, I think, for organizations like ours. We have 6 offices in the region that actually implement economic development activity locally. So we help companies move, start, and grow here.
Okay.
And really, essentially, our charge from the community has been to, number one, we want jobs. We've had this huge in-migration of people that are moving here, many without jobs. And so it's trying to keep pace with that.
Yep.
But we also want a diverse mix of industries that are able to withstand the economic cycle better than we have historically here.
Yeah. So, I mean, all kinds of good things in there that we could unpack, but, talk about, using tourism as a means to end to develop a dynamic job base, which we have now. I have never heard it phrased that way. And, it's interesting. A lot of these, smaller Western towns, which you reference, they only have 1 or 2 legs on that stool holding it up. And, I was back in Colorado when the economic, the Great Recession started in 2008, 2009. And overnight that, Steamboat where I was living became a ghost town. And, you'd walk into a restaurant and it would be completely empty. You would literally be the only person sitting at a table just because the only thing that they had going on in their economy was tourism.
Yeah.
And it works in good times, but it creates a service economy where there's not a lot of upward mobility for people. There were the have-nots, and then there was a definitive line in between the two. And what was frustrating for us as a young family is we would see turnovers of families every 24 months. They would come for the dream, for the lifestyle, struggle, get nowhere. They're living in a 1-bedroom condo for $400,000, and they finally throw up their hands and move back to Denver and give up. And to see these families disrupt their kind of trajectory was tough on us. And when we came to Bend and in the teeth of the gale of the recession, there was still money moving through the ecosystem. Yeah. You could see it in the restaurants. You could see it in there was construction going on. When I came here and I saw in Northwest Crossing, I saw, trusses being put on a house in 2009 and 10. We were probably one of the only places building houses.
And prices were selling for way above, anything that was in other kind of peer markets on a per square foot basis. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so to see the dichotomy on what what you just referenced truly means was interesting. Yeah. And I think that roles of what you do, your role is hopefully is appreciated in the market. I know that's not your motive, but I want to, especially make this public. And, I work with a lot of people that moved to Bend for the first time. And Bend made its way, it made room for me. It makes room for a lot of people. And it provided a lot, there's, you were talking about, you're making sure that the jobs are here for when someone comes here, there's going to be enough jobs, and I came in as the naive person and say, okay, I'm going to make my way here. And of course there's opportunity and I can grit it out. But, to do that in a town where there aren't councils like Economic Development Council, thinking 10, 20 years ahead of me, I can only go so far. So, I just want to kind of express gratitude. And I think there's a lot of people that are new to town that really need to recognize kind of all the foundation that was put in place. And that didn't obviously happen overnight.
Well, thanks for recognizing that. I have a lot of gratitude for coming into a community that was receptive for change.
Okay.
Because a lot of what this growth means is change.
Sure.
And if you survey a lot of the folks in rural parts of the U.S., certainly parts of the rural West, change is not always something they may like to talk about, but when it actually comes, they're not super excited about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed about not only, kind of the city that has the most kind of notoriety of Bend, but the communities throughout the area, they're pretty open to change. And they're embracing that to say, hey, we need to change or we're going to die.
Yep.
Where I think that's maybe that realization hasn't taken hold and have been internalized in other parts of the rural West that
Yep.
And maybe aren't struggling, because it's a really interesting model, because you have places like Boulder, for example, that is right next to a major metropolitan area.
Yeah, you got a couple million people there.
Yeah, we are not next to anything.
Yeah,
We are
quite
kind of
aware, yeah.
out here on our own, and that was certainly driven home when I first visited the area. And had my 4-hour commute through nothingness.
Sure.
To get here, is that we're kind of on our own. We're kind of need to self-determine. We don't have a lot of political clout.
Yep.
We don't have a lot of federal or state resources flowing in here. So it's been awesome to see that spirit of self-determination, I think, create what is here today.
Yeah.
And really what is with this organization too. It's like, hey, if we want to go do something, let's just go figure it out. And that has come back to industry development, what kind of economic development we're doing. I mean, it was when I first started, we really weren't doing anything around entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But as we saw so many people moving here without jobs and saying, hey, I want to start this business, I've always thought about doing this.
Yeah.
We realized quickly we didn't have the resources around to really support those businesses, especially like maybe some of our peers in larger cities had.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, if we're missing some of those elements, let's go out and see if we can create them. Let's get a group of experienced folks, which I think one of the things that's really grown upon me, because I didn't expect to be doing this work for 20 years in Central Oregon.
Okay.
I expected to be here in the kind of 3 to 5 year time frame, on to the next thing and the next community. But what's really grown on me is the people.
Okay.
It's a beautiful place.
Yep.
I knew it was a beautiful place, but I moved from a beautiful place.
Well, there's a lot of beautiful places. Yeah.
Yeah, there are, especially in my opinion in the West, but
Yep.
across this great country. But the people is really, I mean, you touched upon it, just the phenomenal talent that chooses to make this place home, and it's not a pass through for them.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I've looked around, or I've lived in big cities, and I've kind of done my time.
Yep.
A lot fewer people have moved from smaller places like I
Sure.
did. Most of them are coming from larger metro areas, and they're like, this is really what I was hoping that I would find, and what I found.
Yeah.
And this is where I want to raise my kids, or this is when I want to finish out my career, or whatever it is. They're not here for the short term.
Yeah.
Or if you're in the Bay Area, you're there to make some money,
Yep.
save as much as you can, and then get out and maybe live life.
Yeah.
And we see that with a lot of young families. But people here are pretty committed,
Yep.
and then they're also willing to roll up their sleeves and do stuff.
Okay.
And one of the assets that we came around for those entrepreneurs were looking to launch businesses is they didn't have all the answers. Rarely do they in any market does a founder know how to do everything. And so bringing alongside some of those experts that were willing to donate their time is a big part of the support we've wanted to provide on the entrepreneurial front. And then obviously we need money, you need capital.
Yeah.
And
So where does that come from?
Yeah. So, when we first got kind of exposed that this was something that we needed to invest time and resources into, you'd say, well, I know this person in Portland or Seattle, or in some cases it was the East Coast, go to Boston or, to find this equity capital, because it is a unique thing. You've got bank capital and then you got equity capital, and they're vastly different.
Sure.
Different risk levels.
Yeah.
Different, regulatory environments and so forth. And we just had virtually none of that. It was, you had to know someone, and it was formalizing that in a bigger way that we made our focus. And so we went out and recruited a fund manager, a gal named Julie Harrelson,
Okay.
who started up then Cascade Angels,
Mm-hmm.
and had experience doing this in the Portland area. And it's now Cascade Seed Fund. And then, through the efforts of others, again, this team effort is a big theme of the work that we do.
Sure.
Volunteers got together, private business folks, and said, let's do this showcase of what's happening with early stage companies. We know we're small.
Yeah.
We're a little undersized, but let's make ourselves look a little bigger.
Okay.
And we'll have this investment conference called the Ben Venture Conference.
Sure.
And
Which is now huge.
Yeah, it's really grown over the years. And they recruited in through personal relationships some really interesting people that were panelists and kind of advisors, and would critique the companies, but also give kind of a bigger perspective. Well, one of those folks was a guy named Dino Vendetti.
Yep.
Dino had spent some time up in the Seattle area, and then was working in the Bay and the Menlo Park, right in the center of all the action. But had spent a lot of time in Alaska as well, so had an affinity for kind of a mountain town.
Yep.
Eventually wound up moving here and started Seven Peaks Ventures.
Yep.
So pretty interesting couple of developments that happened that they're not fully dedicated to just investing in companies locally,
Yep.
but they're a place to go to that's in town. Hey, I've got this idea. What do you think? And they can provide advice. And then they later established a private accelerator that continues today, mostly focused on tech. So it's building some of these resources around that. We didn't have really co-working spaces then, so it was helping organizations like Bentech.
Yeah, we've had several open this year.
Yeah, I think we're up to 10 or 11 now.
It's incredible. And the dynamic energy, I was in Bentech Center a week or two ago, and just the synergy and the cross-pollination between all these different people. And it feels like you're in downtown San Francisco. It's wild what's happening over there.
It's really cool to see companies form even out of those connections where these would be people working remotely out of their den or their basement. Now they're working together and they're saying, oh, well, I have this expertise, you have that expertise, let's start a company.
Well, and the spin-off effect of all the way through, from hydro flasks to drink tanks to, what I'm looking at right now with B-Bottle that Drew Bledsoe, lives here, is now a part of it. And it's just, it's creating layers of industry that it's phenomenal. And what I'm hoping is that, we have enough legs under that stool now so that when we do hit the next nationwide, economic challenge, that we're going to be more resilient. And I can't help but to believe that we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it was a big wake up call when the recession happened here. We had lots of support from both the private and public sector for this organization, the work that we did, which was all about diversification and creating a base of industries that wasn't tourism, that wasn't necessarily around the building and construction industry. I think everybody said, oh, yeah, now we get what you mean.
Yeah.
Because those industries were really hard hit. Tourism took a huge downturn and all that, disposable income.
Yeah.
And obviously our construction industry was pretty reliant on what was happening here. And then we had the double whammy or triple whammy of having a lot of construction materials built here and shipped across the country. We still have a base of industries for that here, mostly in building products and wood products and so forth. But yeah, I think that people just like, okay, now we get it. Now we'll put some gas in the tank for you guys to kind of do what you need to do. And we learned lessons too. Certainly not perfect information out there about how to do this work. Yeah. I love the comment in our industry. It's when you've seen one community, you've seen one community. So it's really sometimes hard to apply everything unilaterally, even though it may be successful in one area. But we spent a lot of time and effort working on the supply chain and working on building a base of manufacturers in aviation aerospace.
Yeah, and the whole aviation space and the airport, I think, are a subject unto itself on how important that is to Bend or Central Oregon.
Yeah, we really view them as kind of they're related, but you've got the industry of kind of manufacturing pieces and parts as well as full aircraft to the transportation asset that our airport is, and the connection to the rest of the world, given how isolated we are. But that aviation aerospace industry really, nationally, even internationally, was hard hit after a 30-year run of really positive gains and so forth. So we learned our lesson in that to say, okay, well, we're not going to just put all our eggs in maybe a couple baskets, but we're really focused, which common wisdom wouldn't say is possible, on 10 industries right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And that base that's hopefully not a 2 or 3-legged stool, but a multi-legged, table or whatever. And so that includes things like administrative centers and headquarter operations, things that could be located anywhere in the nation, but we're going to have them here. Advanced manufacturing, which is kind of a catch-all for a lot of things that don't fit neatly in other industries, but it's actually manufacturing things.
Okay.
Aviation aerospace certainly continues to be a part of that.
Yep.
Bioscience has seen huge growth here. Some of our best jobs, best paying jobs, and kind of most stable industries have been in bioscience. So if you take all the PhDs in Oregon, for example, that are doing pharmaceutical research, about half of them would be here, which is pretty shocking to think about.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And some national and international companies who come in and purchased and continue to expand operations here, even though they have global operations. And
Lonza just came in and bought, what was Bend Research, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's a pretty big coup, and they're adding jobs weekly.
Yeah. No, they've continued to expand their facilities. They're doing different things too that Ben Research did, which was pretty much a research arm of a lot of larger pharmaceutical companies.
Yep.
And now they're starting to get into some of that manufacturing or those are super prized jobs. And a lot of places spend millions and millions of dollars trying to recruit those industries. But the building products industry is still pretty decent sized here.
Okay.
And it's really grown up, with the kind of resurgence of the economy. Brewing and distilling is one that we're well known for.
Sure.
And it's a big, getting to be a pretty big industry with all our brewers and distillers here. And then outdoor gear and apparel is one that's it'd be fun to talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, that one's growing a lot.
Yeah, it's just
or it's visible. Yeah.
I think maybe I was doing some looking back on this in another talk I had to give. And 7 years ago, I think we had about 24 companies here in that space, and now we're in the 60 to 70 range.
60 to 70.
7 years later, and some
incredible.
Some employment approaching 1,000 people, and a lot of those are smaller companies, but certainly the Hydro Flasks of the world and Roughwares and companies that really got market traction and built their brand make up a component of that, and it makes sense. I mean, we're here in an area where you can go test your product and kind of having out in the elements. A new one for us is professional services. It doesn't seem all that intuitive, but more and more companies are exporting their services outside the area. It could be professional search. It could be even legal or accounting services. But we're seeing a lot of our companies actually have the majority of their clients outside the area. I know wealth management is one that's
Sure.
been around for a while. That certainly falls in that category too. And then specialty food, which is one that is a real enigma for me because we're high and dry.
Yeah.
We have a very short growing season. It's a great place to recreate, but maybe not to grow vegetables per se.
Yeah.
But we have these specialty food products cropping up, and there's almost 50 of those companies here now.
Yeah.
And then tech, of course, has been kind of got a lot of the headlines.
Yep.
But 130 tech companies here now. A lot of those in software, but exciting things happening even in hardware and semiconductor manufacturing as well. So it's pretty cool to have that, a town this size with that kind of a base, and to have at least 20 companies in each of those sectors. In some cases, over 100 companies in each of in those to really weather the next economic cycle when it comes.
Well, I mean, I'm absolutely stunned. I didn't even realize the breadth and the depth of the job creation that we were seeing. I mean, even in real terms of job growth, not as a percentage of, I mean, aren't we competing with big cities like Portland as far as real job growth, not as a percentage of population, but as just a number of jobs created?
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. And this is some of the information we share with the airlines when we're trying to recruit new air service.
Yeah.
Is we actually give the sheer numbers. The growth numbers are off the chart for us, and there's not a faster place as far as growth goes in the state of Oregon, and really we're among the fastest in the nation.
Yep.
When it comes to jobs and GDP growth and population growth, et cetera, even wage growth has been up there really high. But when you look at the sheer numbers, it's like, okay, we're smaller.
Yeah.
But if you exclude the Portland metro area in our own state, which is about 9 times our size, and still include the others, which total make up probably 7 or 8 times our population base, we're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
That are 9 times the size of ours.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stunning, and I would care to conjecture that at these conferences that you're going to, I mean, the tables, the tides turn, and I'm sure there's a lot of people coming to you and this ecosystem trying to learn some lessons. I mean, are we the shining star of job growth and creation at this point in the West?
Well, you mentioned the Milken Institute.
Yeah.
And it's been going for 20 years. Their index that they really rank large and small metros, and they do it on this bundle of kind of economic prosperity or economic activity.
Okay.
Around GDP growth, around what type of industries, what is going on with wages, what's going on with employment, et cetera. Population is actually not part of that.
Yep.
And they kind of bundle that together and say, okay, here's an index for all these cities. I think they are tracking about 350, 360 cities across the U.S. and you wind up number one once. People are like, I've been there. Or I know that place. Yeah. You wind up 2 consecutive years, and they're like, what's going on there? 3. They never had it in 3 consecutive years.
Did that just happen?
That happened this year, and I believe it will probably have a chance at a 4-peat.
Unbelievable.
And it's interesting because the folks, I've got to know the economists at the Milken Institute, because we're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah, sure.
And they've done case studies, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that too, about what they see as different here than other places. But one of their key economists actually now works for the Heartland Institute. It's part of the Walton Family Foundation, Walmart.
Yep.
And they're studying. They're interested in the economy and what makes successful places, because they want obviously build successful communities that have consumers that can spend money, that et cetera, et cetera. So, and they've done a little different index, and they didn't group large and small. They took them all together. It's called the Most Dynamic Metros study that they've just released the first one of this last year. And so it's like 379 metros that they're looking at across the U.S., and Bend ranked number 5. And one of their key criteria, and the kind of premise that they have, is that it's different than the Milken Institute, is they are looking at the proportion of jobs that are from young companies.
Portion of jobs from young companies.
Yeah, which is something we saw when
that's a leading indicator of where this is going.
Yeah, we saw this in the economic downturn, that the companies that were creating the most jobs were all ones that were established 5 or 10 years prior. And so that's why we put a lot of our weight behind the entrepreneurial effort. And their whole premise is that, well, in the top 30, there's only 2 that don't have a real high scoring index on this proportion of jobs coming from young companies.
Okay.
And Ben ranked super high on that. So another top 10 ranking for the community, and this is against even larger metros, where you think, okay, that's what's gathering all the capital and the young companies and the entrepreneurs and the young adults. We're in the ring with some pretty heavy hitters and all that. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow, it's incredible. So, to take a step back, and this isn't your job to fix or to address, but what about the people that have come to Bend and said, okay, it's perfect. I love the size. 100,000 people in the city is a perfect, tidy city for me. I can go out and mountain bike out my front door, and I can go to 30 breweries, and I have a great job. Enough. There's, what do you say to them, or what do you say to the people that, were here prior to the boom and they didn't partake in it? They didn't have the right skill sets to partake in the industry growth that we had, and they wanted the very inexpensive, ordinary, Oregon town that didn't experience this type of growth, and they kind of feel on the outside of what's going on. How do you react to that? I mean, how do you we obviously empathize for that, but that's not the framework on which Bend was founded. But how would you respond to those type of people?
Yeah, I'd say to keep things as they are or always were is balancing on a knife edge.
Okay.
It's super difficult to do for any time at all. And, it's back to the old adage, you're either growing or you're dying.
Yeah.
And that relates to a lot of different things. It's not just in sheer numbers, people or development or whatever, but it has to do with what are people doing?
Yeah.
How are they earning earning money? And I think if the folks that maybe our long-term residents were saying, hey, I really wish the mills were back, and we had those types of jobs here that didn't require college education or advanced degrees, and you could still buy a house, have a family on one income.
Yeah.
I'm saying that'd be great as well, but that's not the world today. It's just not the world today, and the world that we have today and the jobs that we have are not going to be what's going to be in 10 or even 20 years. It's really a super rapidly changing flywheel we're on right now.
Sure.
And so it keeps us on our toes to be able to try to find the next thing. But for those who have moved here and said this is this is the perfect ideal community, I don't want it to change. I would say, well, you picked it in a snapshot in time, and it wasn't this way 10 years ago. It wasn't this way 20 years, and it's not going to be that in the future. Yes, you may have more competition for your favorite fishing hole or your trail and so forth, but Whenever I go up on Mount Bachelor and I look down at the town, it's pretty hard to see it.
Yeah, it just blends into the trees. It's, you see the cinder cone of Pilot Butte, but that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And people have come from other communities like parts of California or Colorado and other areas that have grown rapidly, even Idaho. And they're like, well, I don't want that to happen. What, happened.
Sure.
Well, number one, we have Oregon land use laws,
which are incredibly progressive. I mean, obviously there's probably some stumbling blocks. I was just talking to Kirk Schiller about it, but even he, CEO of the biggest land development company in Bend, is pro land use laws.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty unusual.
Yeah, it is, because it definitely makes their job harder. It makes our job harder, but we really don't try to put our clients into areas that are already designated for development.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of concentric circle, methodology around Oregon's land use laws, but the reality is that 75% of Deschutes County, for example, is owned by the federal government, either the BLM or the Forest Service.
Wow.
And so that's really off limits for development.
Yeah.
So if you're worried about your open space, getting eroded in a major way, don't, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. It's not going to happen in my kid's lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, these are areas that are pretty much protected. Now, you may not be able to go to Sparks Lake and have that, magical experience where the only person on the lake.
Yeah.
You may have to go to those other lakes that, or maybe more off the beaten path. But I think that's one of the things that people say is unique about our region too, is that everything's so doggone close.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to be in nature, if you want to be kind of in the mountains or in the desert, it's a 30-minute drive, if that.
Oh yeah, maximum.
Yeah. So that next lake is another 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
And I think in most frame of reference for people who are coming from other parts, they're like, that's not an inconvenience for me. It may be an inconvenience for the locals who are used to going to those spots and not seeing another person. But I'm sorry to say that's going to change.
Yep.
And there are lots of other parts of Oregon, not just in our region, where you can still have that experience that are not far away.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, nothing is happening in those communities.
Well, and I think so the way you just phrased that if you're not growing, you're on a knife edge, and that, we're in a continual, mode of change everywhere, I think was one of the best descriptions. And I want to go back and kind of study what you said. But I'm in full agreement with that. I mean, I think that what we've got here is incredibly unique, and all the people that I've met that have been here for a long time are absolutely behind the change.
Yeah. It's interesting because you might think the opposite. You might think, this, everything's terrible, but they're like, hey, growing up here, I didn't think I was going to be able to stay because there wasn't going to be anything interesting to do.
Yeah.
And with my free time, and then I couldn't make a living.
Yeah.
And it was hard, it'd be hard to raise a family. And I hear those stories from my peers in other parts of rural America where that's a real problem. I mean, for me, I'm biased, obviously, but I think the foundation of a real healthy community that has great nonprofits, that has public services and all that, is a super strong economic base.
Yeah,
and a base with jobs where people can afford to live.
Well, I think what we have here is so incredibly unique. I think it's almost like, an educational process that I'm going through that, I assume other people will do as well, to understand how dynamic this is. My next interview on this is with Dick Koenig, who runs the Reach Another Foundation, and they're doing big things in Africa, and it's based out of Bend. Yeah. They're trying to, eliminate spina bifida in the whole continent of Africa based out of the brain trust of who they're working with and the financial resources right here out of Bend.
Super cool.
It's incredible. But then, you were referencing the natural resources. It's embarrassing. I can be at my house, and in the evenings I'm looking west over the Cascades, and we have a 2.5 million acre wilderness area out my back door. And I think from almost any other state to just quantify what 2.5 million acres of wilderness area are, that is cohesive and all together. And then there's a hard stop. And then I turn, I flip in my chair and I look at Bend, and you're talking about the 10-legged stool of economic growth. To have that interface is I don't think there's anything like it. Right.
It's pretty unique. We're getting called by a lot of mountain towns that are the one-trick pony, that have really tourism and the seasonality that comes with that, saying, hey, how can we do something a little different here?
Yeah.
Because we do have some talent in those areas too that they want to try to capitalize on. But I will say that what the Milken Institute, maybe unpack that a little bit, did kind of a separate study to say, okay, well, why is this place so dynamic, and why is it showing this resiliency and kind of high, consistent high performance? And they really attribute it to the fact that there is a kind of a collaborative
that's
way
all
of
I hear.
doing things.
I keep
here.
on hearing collaborative. Yeah.
That it comes down to when people move to the area and they're like, hey, I'm looking for work. I'm looking for opportunities. Who can you connect me with? And I'll give them names of folks. A lot of times these are the owners or founders or CEOs of the companies, and they're like, I can't believe it that you referred me to that person, and they had a meeting with me. I don't know these
people. They give me a job.
to develop some opportunities, but they're just so floored that people would actually take time. And I think one of the key reasons comes back to this intentionality of people picking this place to live, and they were in their same shoes some time ago.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll play it forward. Maybe I'll pay it back. Somebody did that for me when I came, and I'm gonna do that for them. And it's a much different dynamic. It reminds me a little bit in some cases on just the kind of in-migration we've had here of what they have in a place like Alaska.
Yep.
Because in Alaska, people come and go all the time.
Sure.
And so I think one of the first questions, if you're in Anchorage, for example, you're going to ask, oh, where are you from?
Yeah.
Because there's so few, local residents.
Yeah.
And people are coming in and out a lot for the energy industry. And I think that's a question people ask here. Oh, where did you move from?
Yep.
And they're accepting, and it's not like, oh, you moved from out of town. Well, we're going to give you 5 or 10 years before you kind of feel like we'll give you the time of day. Yeah. Before you're kind of given some credibility and so forth. And that's a kind of, whether it's a big city, quite frankly, in my experience, or whether it's a very small town, that can kind of be a mentality of like, we'll see how you work out, instead of saying, oh, we're glad you're here. What do you like to do?
Yeah.
What are you doing while you're here? And how are you? I think a really interesting question that will be interesting to see as this place grows, if this will continue. But it's like, well, what are you doing with your free time?
Yeah.
Which is, I don't think, maybe a question people ask much when they're in other parts of the country. It's like, well, what do you do for work?
Yeah.
And kind of how many kids do you have? And instead of, well, what are you involved with? It doesn't involve making money or taking care of your own.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. And what you're talking about it, and I would love to unpack a little more. What does it mean to be a citizen of Central Oregon? Because like you were saying, so often it's just measured in years or how long you've been here. I think it's different here. I think, you can be a proud citizen of Central Oregon day one and included, but why? And what does that mean? What are the responsibilities that, come with living here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably lots of different answers out there.
Yeah.
I would say more and more, I characterize it as how people are engaged.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you got a great job. Maybe you're even working remotely for someone else, which we have a lot of remote workers here. But what are your passions? What are you doing around those passions, and how are you getting engaged? Really, to make a place better even than when they came.
Well, and that's where when I finished my conversation with Jim Schell, I was chock full of guilt about he's running all these boards and all these mentorship programs, and
Jim can do that to you.
He's a mentor for 100 people, and here I am, and I've come, I've now been in Bend for a decade, and I'm like, I'm not giving enough back. I've taken more from this than I've given back, and that's where I feel my head going, and where I feel I owe it to the town to open that door and open those opportunities for other people. And I still need to figure out my way, but I think that's kind of a commonality and a theme that everyone I've talked to, from Kirk Schuler on up, says the same thing. Somebody opened the door. You just said it. Somebody opened the door for them. They're going to open the door for somebody else.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's many places like that, And I was actually just in Utah a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking with some of the locals there, and there's definitely they have a chip on their shoulder, and they're in this business environment, and they're in a beautiful place that has some business, but it's not this upwardly mobile ladder, and they definitely get pigeonholed into how far they can grow. They struggle. There's the have, there's the have not, and then even when the locals come in, they're not opening the door for anybody. There's this scarcity mindset, right? And they're like, I've got my job, but there's not many, and they don't necessarily want anyone else coming to the town, it's just a completely different vibe, and it's interesting to have this discussion because I've always tried to figure out why everyone here is so darn friendly.
Yeah.
And it's probably because there isn't a scarcity. There isn't a scarcity of opportunities for jobs. There isn't a scarcity of opportunities for your home and your house life and where you're going to put your kids in school. There's a little bit of room for everybody, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, and something I experienced, quite frankly, in a big city where there is a very much a scarcity, and it's a scarcity of time. Yeah. And so you're like, well, I'm only going to make friends with so many people because there's lots of other people behind them that I just don't have time for. Where I don't see that mentality here, where people are kind of like, well, hey, you like to do this? Well, you should know so-and-so.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this sharing of information and friends and contacts that I think it is pretty unique. It comes back to the reason why, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And why we've really called this place home is that it's pretty special in that way.
Well, I think we're kind of closing in on this, so we don't need to go too much further. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss today, or?
Well, we kind of touched on it, but one of I think the key assets that we recognized early and our companies made very clear to us, especially the tech companies, are like, if you don't do anything else for us, get us good connections to the rest of the world. Yeah. And, we don't care about anything else. Workforce we'll try to take care of on our own. We'll do this, that, and the other to, make our business successful.
Is that planes?
Yeah. That was the connection. And so it was air service. And at the time that we kind of went out and did some of those surveys, we talked to 300 or 400 companies every year at their place of business to kind of identify opportunities and challenges. And so we focus on that, and the region is focused on that. It's not just EDCO. The Visitor Association has been hand in glove with kind of the chambers and EDCO. I really feel like the airport, it's a public entity, but it's like welcoming all that help. Yeah. And so when we go to meet with airlines, we go together. Yeah. And if we can't go together, we don't go. It's not like, oh, well, you can carry it this time. We always have that kind of representation. And this is about the season when we go do that. Yeah. I guess it gets noted by the airlines because we don't walk in saying, hey, if you create this new service, people will use it. We come with data. Yeah. We come with a pro forma and a way for those airlines to make money. It's the same kind of business development approach you would if you were launching an enterprise. And there's hardly a place you'll find that's got better air service for our size.
Incredible.
Or that's been growing faster. Yeah. I think we are set to double our number of seats available to passengers and passengers in like a 4-year time frame. So it's remarkable, and more air service is on the way than we've ever seen in our history, which is we've had some pretty good years for air service. We'll be able to hit a dozen destinations from if you're in Bend, a 30-minute drive. If you're in Redmond, a no-minute drive. Yeah. And then all the connections that makes, and we're really excited about some stuff going further east too. So that's one of our big focuses, the Chicago flight, the direct flight out of...
that just started, didn't it?
Just started, yeah. Okay. And then we continue to work on the airlines for Minneapolis and Dallas-Fort Worth.
Oh,
wow. Getting pretty far to the East Coast that way. And it's just for us, we feel like it's a port of call as well. Yeah. For those, travelers getting in and out of here, it's a huge convenience, but it also provides an open door for businesses in those regions to say, oh, well, we've got now a direct connection that's a super easy flight into Central Oregon to utilize what we've got going here. And, it's not the leading factor that has led to some of the huge tech investments that's happened in Central Oregon. But it sure makes those investments a lot easier to make if you've got, an hour flight to the Bay Area, and not just one flight, but 6 or 8 flights a day on three different airlines.
Well, I think that's the key. A lot of these small regional airports saying, we can connect to 8 cities, but it's 1 flight a day on a small CJ or whatever the little prop in Bombardier planes. What we have here is incredible. Yeah, to put a story to that, I had to fly to New York for some real estate training, and I had my selection of half a dozen flights in like a 5 or 6 hour period to fly to Portland. So I was able to leave my house an hour and 10 minutes before my flight. I drive in, park 100 yards maximum away, high five the security because there's never any line. And I jump on my plane, take a 38-minute hop to Portland, walk down 5 gates, and it was a 30-minute connection. And I was on a direct flight to LaGuardia. So, I mean, I was able to transfer to LaGuardia with one little 30-minute layover and essentially no wait in entering the system. And it was really shocking to me on kind of the backside of it is when you have to reverse engineer that system, you can spend hours just getting in these big airports in these cities. And, I often tell people that I can get to downtown San Francisco than people who live in San Francisco live there.
That's really true.
Yeah, and you go on a Friday night flight from San Francisco to Bend, and half the plane. It's people went and still have business connections there, and they're coming home to mountain bike for the weekend with their family. But you're right. What is that? An hour and a half flight with no wait at the airport and direct to San Francisco, and you take a shuttle into downtown, and you're in downtown from your house in a couple hours, 2.5, 3 hours. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, which that convenience I think is just going to be ever more important.
Yeah.
And I think it sets us up another kind of foundation for our region performing well.
Yeah.
When whatever the next economic cycle brings us.
Well, hey, I appreciate your time, but more importantly, I'm grateful for all that you've done to provide the opportunity for all the people that came after you. And, my goal is to try to pay this forward a little bit and, kind of help spread the word and just kind of, a gentle nudge to be grateful for all those that came before us and created that opportunity.
Yeah.
And then, kind of, so we get to paint our own picture for what Central Oregon looks like in the next 25 years. I mean, it's going to be exciting. It's not going to remain the same, is it?
It's not going to remain the same. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, thank you again. Appreciate your time, Roger.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Thanks for joining us. This is the Ben Beat, and until next time.